what they are building, mainly because they start the history of modern humanity from the hunter, that there will be disruption. Disruption is normally seen as something negative, but it's now being cast in positive terms, that there's going to be disruption. Disruption from production processes, products, services, and so on. And the effects can be seen in different economic sectors, from energy to transport to human settlements, food and clothing, healthcare, and to how we communicate, including recreation and leisure. In theory, the new technologies hold the promise of creating greater efficiencies in the use and recycling of natural resources, enabling, for instance, the transition from fossil fuel-based to carbon-neutral sources of energy, to sustainable food production, and so on. Whilst the promises of the new technologies have often been hyped beyond the current limits of the sciences on which it is based, it is indeed not hard to be bewildered, at times even amazed, at how quickly some of its disruptive effects or innovation are emerging in many areas of economic and social life, just in the last decade. For instance, in the transport industry, where, as Professor Makanya was saying, I had the privilege of serving in recent years, we've seen services such as Uber and Taxify. With the reaction, by the way, from sections of the established taxi industry, not very different from the Luddites who were responding in England to the first industrial revolution by destroying the machines, thinking that they can halt technology. Workers destroying machines in England. The reaction to Uber and Taxify, we've seen elements of that. To the boarding and lodging industry, the Airbnb, music and movie industries, Spotify and Netflix. In my stupidity, I don't know what I pressed on my cell phone as I was trying to explore what Netflix is. I'm paying some 89.99 every month for something that I don't watch. That's part of the effect of the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, to things like fully automated factory floors, self-driving cars, trains and ships, digital banking, cryptocurrencies, and metadata services. There is an interesting argument that is being advanced that sometimes all what we are talking about, we talk about it often in neutral terms and fail to realize sometimes that what we may be dealing with here is a response of global capitalism to the crisis that took place in 2007 and 2008, with a crisis of profitability in sections of the system, and that all what we call the fourth industrial revolution may actually be nothing else other than an attempt to rescue the profitability of the system. It's important, I think, Prof, that we also engage with that, so that when we deal with this, we are not superficial about it. However, if we take a more critical look at the way in which the dominant discourses on the fourth industrial revolution tend to frame their theories of change and hold this up against historic questions about social justice, radical equality, and sustainable development, serious issues do arise from a progressive perspective. The first observation to make is that the loudest proponents of fourth industrial revolution talk about the new tech mainly in optimistic terms, only focusing on its promises but not its perils. Where they do concede the dark side of the fourth industrial revolution, this is framed in interesting terms. We often hear, for example, claims such as the fourth industrial revolution will cause massive job losses, will make many job categories redundant, machines will take over human jobs. Whilst none of these statements are intrinsically wrong, They imply that, as I have said, we have no control or choices in how we want to use technologies in economic life. It also implies that these outcomes are caused by technology and not the product of human decisions. In this way, if we use the well-known concepts, some of the concepts in social sciences, technological innovation is posed in largely positivistic and reductionistic terms. If the fourth industrial revolution is posed in this fashion, it would imply particular technological outcomes are inevitable or natural, the result of the march of technological progress that cannot be stopped. We would argue that these particular pathways and the evolution of technology is socially determined at the end of the day. And democratic claims must be placed at its center. Whilst we agree that we cannot prevent or undo the general process of technological development, like the Luddites, as I have said, tried to do in the 19th century, we surely can influence its particular pathways, social applications, and benefits to support democratic choices that place social and ecological justice at its core. This is the fundamental issue that we are facing as humanity, actually. How do we place social, human, and ecological justice at the center of what is evolving in the world, rather than just to sit back as if we are victims? Let me just illustrate this with an example. Sometimes when I'm thinking about these matters, as in fact I was preparing for this lecture, if more jobs are going to be lost through the fourth industrial revolution, it means more and more people are going to be unemployed. Then who is going to buy the products that will be produced now much more rapidly and which are more sophisticated by the very same revolution that is shedding jobs? Can society afford to lose jobs at the rate at which it seems it's going to happen and still be able to have humanity surviving? I think those are very important questions that we need to be grappling with. Of course, part to the answer to that is that the more developed countries are likely to cope better with that because they normally shove to developing countries all the problems of unemployment and poverty and starvation as their cushion against which their system is able to sustain higher levels and higher standards of life in developing countries. But how sustainable is that? I think that these are some of the questions that in this lecture one is trying to grapple with. So the tendency, therefore, to naturalize what is essentially a social and political process without posing these important questions, it's like we submit to the fact that some people say there will always be poor people, and we make that to appear as if it's natural. It is for this reason that I believe that debates about the nature and impact of technologies of the fourth industrial revolution must deal with the issue of how different social forces will seek to appropriate and harness its benefits for competing purposes. As I have said, proponents sometimes of the fourth industrial revolution talk positively. This is inevitable and it's going to bring about better life for humanity. But the first three industrial revolutions also saw massive technological advances to such an extent that in the world today, it's possible that every living human being can have at least 1 meal a day. But that's not what we are having, despite these technological advances. In fact, the period between the first industrial revolution and today, poverty has deepened and social inequality has actually deepened, which therefore necessitates that we ask the question, how do we ensure that the fourth industrial revolution does not further deepen the inequalities that we have, but it actually acts to ameliorate and to reduce social inequalities? That's the question that one is posing and trying to answer today. If one looks at the social history of all previous technological revolutions, we have also seen the growth of concentration of wealth in more and more minorities of the population, and with more and more people sharing much less from the wealth that has been created by these technological advances and revolutions. Therefore, the main proposition I want to make today is that for the sake of our futures, and it is important to ask this question, pose this question in a university, it is important that we link all technologies to social relations and the mechanisms of their social production, and also to make sure that perhaps it's not technology as such that poses challenges, but it is who controls the technology, and towards what end is that technology being used. We think this is a very fundamental question if we are to really confront the issue of addressing global inequalities and inequalities within society. Maybe before I come into looking at the state and the universities, I just want to also highlight the fact that in South Africa, the debate on the fourth industrial revolution has to be framed in the context of what our society faces and the challenges that we have. That what we are faced with largely is the historic task of transforming an economic and social order that has been distorted by unsustainable inequalities expressed across class, ethnic, gender, and spatial lines, itself a consequence of over 3 centuries of colonial apartheid rule. Another way of understanding what we are faced with as a country is to locate ourselves, for instance, within the context of the SADC region. That some of the challenges we are dealing with of the relationship between South Africans and foreign nationals has to do with the historical evolution economically of the SADC region over the last century or two. That the rest of the SADC region has actually been a labor reservoir for South African business. Before 1994, that labor reservoir were migrant workers who were largely in hostels in mining towns and cities. But after 1994, the rest of the SADC region continues to draw labor. Continues to provide labor, mainly to South African business. But it's not only business now. It's even in middle class and professional families. If you go to many households today, you will realize, for instance, how many nationals from the rest of the SADC region are domestic workers, for instance, or gardeners in the households of many middle class professionals in South Africa today. But what we are seeing happening now is that, unlike in the past, the labor from the rest of the SADC region is now no longer in the hostels but it's in the very same informal settlements that are occupied by South Africans who are increasingly migrating from rural South Africa into the major urban areas. Then that's toxic. It's a powder keg. You're setting the poor against the poor. We are setting the working class against the working class. And by the way, employers sometimes they stand from a distance and do not want to say much. They also, in many instances, are fueling this because many of them employed undocumented migrants because they provide cheap labor at the expense of South African labor, setting the working class against the working class. Now, I'm raising this because this is the context against which we are looking at this issue of the fourth industrial revolution. Unless we pose the challenge and the meaning of the fourth industrial revolution within this context and the challenges that we are facing, we will not actually be grappling with the reality that we face and what needs to be done. And therefore, in this context, also the role of the state. In South Africa, we have the National Development Plan, which we adopted as a macro-social policy framework within which government was to respond to a whole range of challenges, some of which I've just outlined, in education, in health, in social services, in human settlements, all aimed at confronting the scourge of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. As such, in our country, we have a challenge of having to deal effectively with both long-standing colonial issues, as we at the same time have to learn to confront new issues never experienced before. That is why we have to think about the politics and sociology of the fourth industrial revolution in confronting and transforming persistent issues such as gender, tribal, ethnic, xenophobic, and class prejudices and inequalities, whose resolution has so far escaped all our efforts, despite some significant progress we've made as the country over the past 25 years. We also have the challenge of securing futures of all of our communities, especially the poor and working classes, in a world where automation and smart machines threaten to erase the traditional labor market structures, including many occupations and careers. And we have to achieve these goals in the context of ecological sustainability. Now, just to recap, the major fourth industrial revolution technological innovations that are currently underway include automation, the convergence in the boundaries of biological, digital, and physical elements in nature, big data and its impact in terms of planning, genomic engineering, which includes now crops, humans, and other animals, and geoengineering altering our physical environment. All these innovations, to the extent that they are absorbed into existing industries, and depending on their particular configurations, will most certainly impose what are contradictory effects on economies and therefore on our labor markets. It is, of course, argued not without merit that the fourth industrial revolution will create whole new labor categories and require new knowledge and skills, providing alternatives to current and future generations. But as we can see in the case of the banking sector, as I said, my eldest son is making me to read about blockchains. In fact, blockchain technology is likely to entirely decimate the banks as we've known them. There will be absolutely no reason why there should be a middle man or woman called a bank. Once blockchain advances, we will be able to do transactions as individuals through a system that has got its own autonomy. Now, for this reason, therefore, we must ask the fundamental question: what should we be doing as government, as the state, in order to ensure that the fourth industrial revolution acts to benefit our societies and assist us to address these problems rather than exacerbate them? I'm posing this knowing that it's not an easy question, because, as I have said, technology, by the way, has got the potential, as Karl Marx would have said, to do away with the drudgery of manual labor and mechanize, automate, give us enough time to rest, to play and to do all sorts of things. Technology has got the capacity to do that. But at the same time, technology, depending on its uses and in whose hands it is, has got the potential of deepening inequality. The use of big data, for example, has already begun. There are many things that we are beginning to see other than the example that I have seen, even including the emergence of new forms of money like cryptocurrencies that are threatening to displace traditional money forms. In other words, one main argument I want to make in this lecture is that if we are to properly grapple with the fourth industrial revolution, it's not only a South African challenge, but it's a challenge facing humanity as a whole. We need to develop a progressive theory of change and to say, how do we try and harness the fourth industrial revolution to be able to play a progressive role and in building an inclusive society. One of the big challenges we face in South Africa today is that we have an economy that is dependent on coal, in essence. The supply of our electricity is dependent on coal. That's what Eskom does. Yet, at the same time, the banking industry globally is showing less and less appetite in investing in coal projects, which therefore requires that we seriously look into a transition from a coal-based electricity generation to move, for instance, to renewables. And there's lots of potential. I'm told that today in the world we are using less than 1% potential that is there in using the sun for purposes of energy. There's still lots that can still be done in order to do that. But the struggle in the world today is, how do we make a just transition? So is the challenge for the fourth industrial revolution. How do we make a just transition from the current phase of our economic development to this fourth industrial revolution? What would constitute a just transition? Now, which then brings me to the contribution and the role of higher education, science and technology, in assisting in bringing about that just transition. What is clear, though, even before I talk about that, is that the fourth industrial revolution does not mean an end to social struggles in creating a just society. Struggles for creation of a just society are even more required if new technologies are not going to deepen and exacerbate inequalities. Now, President Ramaphosa has created this new configuration of bringing together higher education and science and technology. We believe that this is one area, trying to narrow this to our terrain, Professor Makani. This is one area which we need to look closely at. How do we ensure that we make use of this reality to contribute to this just transition from where we are now? Biggest opportunities that we have is to connect the various parts of what we refer to as the post-school education and training system, bringing together our TVET colleges, our universities, our science councils, to drive innovation and skills development. For instance, one of my major criticisms of many industries in South Africa in the wake of these new technologies and advancements has been the failure to plan and the failure to retrain. What have the banks been doing all along in anticipation of these new technologies to retrain and reskill the workers such that we are able, for instance, to place them in different kinds of roles? For instance, it's very interesting that the banking sector in South Africa is facing the challenges that it is facing, yet the majority of the people in our country are not within the banking system. Even those who are in the banking system, they are in the periphery of the banking system. There is lots of opportunities, for instance, for cooperative banks and for other forms of financial cooperatives that could be playing a very crucial role in providing financial services to the poor, which is something that then as a country and a society we could have looked at in order to be able to deal with this particular problem. The other thing that is a challenge for our sector is the necessity to pull resources together, to expand and diversify the post-school education and training system, to expand enrollment and differentiation in the system, and to create new capacities where there are gaps in our institutional landscape, like, for instance, the creation of universities of science to actually support innovation, and looking at new ways of skilling and reskilling that are quicker and better, that would facilitate quicker adjustment and more towards a just transition. I've been thinking as I was driving here, Prof, that one of the things that we have to do as a country, I need to say this very carefully because I may be misread. Particularly when we are a minister, we are very constrained sometimes on what you want to say. But I will say this. To provide university education through full-time students who are given accommodation, who are given food, who are given transport, who are given learning materials, is something that we have struggled for. But the question arises, we have 1.1 million university students today. In 10 years' time, according to the National Development Plan, we are expected to have 1.6 million students. Will we be able to reach this 1.6 million students using this method that I've just aligned? My answer is no. Dabezita. It's a Rolls Royce that we want to drive this one, of having to provide higher education, especially at a time now when we need to be expanding online provision of university education, for instance. And what implications does that have for an institution like Unisa? I can see we are facing different kinds of challenges. Students who feel that they are outside, they need to be supported as if they were full-time students in a university that is actually meant for distance learning. Now, one of the challenges, therefore, that we face as a system is to change, as I say, the manner in which we are providing education as part of this task of reskilling and assisting in a just transition, so that we do not end up with technology that exacerbates inequalities. I think we need to rethink quite seriously the offerings of post-school education and training in our country. And how do we use the same technology to assist this just transition in terms of knowledge production and skills development? I am of the view that we are not going to adjust to the fourth industrial revolution by training new human beings. The students we have now, this fourth industrial revolution is upon us, and the lecturers we have now are the only ones. We can't throw them somewhere else in the dustbin and actually get different ones who would have somehow been skilled somewhere else, which means the major challenge is how do we reskill, and how do we try and use the very same technology to have this just transition, if that is the main theme that I'm actually talking about. And what implications does that have for funding the university system and for what our universities need to do? This means also that this has got implications for curricula and programs that we are offering in our institutions. We need to train students that have got capacity to transition. We need to give them skills that are necessary to be able to adjust to new conditions. And that is the challenge that is facing our own institutions. And our universities and our TVET colleges need to do something about this, which Manuel Castells called reprogrammable skills. Also, this work towards the just transition is going to require new modes of thinking, and maybe even either new discipline or transdisciplinary interventions in a manner that we have not been able to do before. And maybe that the current structure of the university system and the boundaries of subjects also need to be rethought quite seriously. If the fourth industrial revolution cuts across the boundaries, the digital, the physical, and the biological boundaries, do we still have a reason why we should have physical science that has got a very tight boundary with anthropology, for instance? Or do we need to be opening a new kind of dialogue and relationship between the different disciplines that we actually have? I think that those are some of the things. I would also argue, by the way, unlike many people who say, the fourth industrial revolution, what it says is that everybody must become a mini machine. Everybody must do science, technology, engineering, mathematics. If you don't do that, you do not fit into this. The fourth industrial revolution is going to bring about new kinds of social problems, by the way, which makes it even more crucial for social sciences and humanities to be able to play a very central role, but maybe not so much as distinct disciplines in the manner that we have now, but in a transdisciplinary fashion, as I am trying to say. Shouldn't we also be thinking about starting new projects? It's very interesting. One example that comes to mind is the Sociology of Work project at Wits University, which was started by Professor Eddie Webster, one of whose intentions was actually to track the impact of automation on the nature of work going forward into the future. We need something along those lines, but on a much more bigger scale and on a much more radical scale. Moving towards ending. Part of preparing for the fourth industrial revolution is to deepen the kind of transformation that we've been talking about in our country. Transformation of knowledge relations along gender, race, and class lines. It's not a luxury or politically correct to ensure that women, for instance, access higher education. You cannot leave any sector of South African society, or any sector of society, anywhere else in the world behind if we are to be able to cope with the realities that we have. In fact, you need more of gender transformation, more of confronting racism, if we are actually going to be able to create a just transition to a society where more and more people will be able to benefit from. Which includes another thing that I'm very passionate about, Prof. This continued reproduction of inequalities in our university system between your former white universities and those universities that were serving the black population in the past is not sustainable. It must just be brought to an end. If it means radical reallocation of resources, for instance now, I'm dealing with the challenge of university accommodation. But the biggest crisis is in rural universities, which happens to be those universities that were serving the black population in the past. Shouldn't we be saying, within the next 4 to 6 years, most of the money that we have for student accommodation should be going there, because students in rural areas have no option, unlike in urban areas where they can be able to actually access other types of privately owned accommodation, though it is actually not ideal. In other words, part of preparing and a just transition to a fourth industrial revolution is confronting the inequalities that we face frontally. Technology in itself will not resolve that unless we change the balance of forces in society such that we are able to overcome the kinds of inequalities that we have. So the transformation that we talk about is even becoming more necessary now than has been the case before. Innovation also becomes central. Innovation becomes central. There is absolutely no ways we are going to be able to deal with the issue of the fourth industrial revolution unless we place innovation at the center of the higher education system, including, by the way, something that I want to do to support and incentivize innovation in our technical and vocational education and training colleges, and to be able to support innovation in all of South African society, and not to limit innovation to elites. That's also the challenge of our institutions and our universities and colleges and so on. In conclusion, let me make these 2 points. Maybe the other one by way of emphasis. As we confront all this, South Africa, we are not an island. We are part of the SADC region. We are part of the African continent. I see that I was being misinterpreted about what I was saying by some about African leaders themselves thinking about what political choices they are making and what impact is that having, without denying the fact that we are a product of centuries of underdevelopment and colonization. But how do we as African leaders make the right kinds of decisions? I'm glad there's Dr. Kobela there, because we've had a deal, maybe this deal, Dr. Kobela, so that none of us change our minds. We've said that we need a professorial chair on SADC studies here in South Africa, so that we are able to understand and pursue regional economic integration, because South Africa will not be able to develop as an island. If South Africa continues to develop on its own at the expense of the region, we are going to have the problems that we are having now multiplied 10 times. Because the challenge in the region is uneven development that we inherited from colonialism, and that is something that we actually need to challenge. So that is very important. The last thing is that I wish to welcome and congratulate the higher education sector, especially our vice chancellors, that at last we have now decided to convene a higher education conference. I spent most of my time in my earlier stint as Minister of Higher Education and Training pushing you to say, we can't be having, South Africa's higher education system is the largest in the African continent. We can't continue, and by the way, we are servicing the rest of the African continent in many ways. If you go to our universities, you look at your masters and PhDs, quite a significant percentage is actually students from the rest of the continent. Sometimes we are blind to that fact. It's an important role that we are playing as South Africa, that we should be proud of. We are making our own contribution because we are not indeed an island. But then we can't have a situation where we are not reflecting and analyzing on an ongoing basis the challenges that are facing our higher education system. The fact that you are having a conference, I hope you will have it annually, to be able to analyze the challenges and how we are going to be able to deal with some of these factors. And as I say, how would higher education contribute to a just transition into the fourth industrial revolution? Thank you very much.
Well, even if you were planning registering in the studies of the fourth industrial revolution, you'll agree that after this lecture, the clinical dissection of the subject with intellectual precision was quite amazing. And I want to just be sure, because some people from the distance might think that I was fortifying myself with wine there. It's a cranberry. so that I become braver. You know, after the communion in church, the priest has the full jug. He starts shaking. And what was a very flat sermon, suddenly the priest gets inspired. He wants to run another sermon. You will all agree that this is profound, but the success of it will be how we as higher education, science councils, TVET colleges, different institutions take this message, different portions of it, and say, what does this mean? Because this is seminal in a way. It went beyond just the cliche of transdisciplinarity to say how some of these subjects could be configured. because you are beginning to see a hybrid or a quagga of subjects here. BSc combined with anthropology and many other things, because the problem is the science or the technological determinism. That reminded me, Minister, before I call our Professor Sibate to come and give a vote of thanks, of the paper you wrote in a journal in the late 80s on social sciences, which I prescribed to my classes. And the sharpness of this, of course, from time to time you realize that even though the minister tried very hard to contain that elements of Marxism were coming to the surface, as a good communist it could be. So that in itself, I think, is a very profound intervention, so much that Dr. Kobela will not escape. We will corner him to discuss several chairs from NRF. So he will be held hostage until he confesses some chairs. And I've seen Prof. Mulama as well, our former registrar. So without any further ado, I just want to say that this lecture is beginning to raise questions, clear some of the air. For lecturers who are here, scholars, knowledge workers, let's take it further. The failure of any public lecture of this nature is when it dies within these walls. And you do know that we have a crisis of intellection in this country. The thinking in order to solve our problems. Because we are very noisy, argumentative democracy, obsessed with headlines. But we do not have the appetite for a systematic, sustained, robust intellectual engagement. That's why slogans and phrases are used as an opium to hypnotize the unsuspecting public. So with those words, Prof. Sibate, our acting executive dean of the College of Education, will come and give a vote of thanks. Then thereafter, I will be indicating where we get whatever drinks we have. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much. Siyabonga. Kialeboha. Muchos gracias. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It is often said in everything that we receive, that we get given, we should say thanks. Can we give a round of applause to our many honorable minister? Mr. Program Director, Dr. Somadonda Fikeni, many thanks for the manner in which you directed and guided these proceedings. You often amaze me with your spontaneous sense of humor. And sometimes I liken you to the nutty professor. Professor Makanya, our dear principal and vice chancellor, our gratitudes are safe towards you for bringing the honorable minister to our environment, to our space. The honorable minister of higher education, science and technology, Dr. B.E. Nzimande. Our valued institution, Dr. Nzimande. And I do think you can feel it even in your blood. We all feel honored, and we are all here, and in our multitudes, as you can see in the Senate Hall. Diplomatic corps from across the globe, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit, to listen, and to honor this lecture. We feel very proud. Unisa Council members, our fathers and mothers, thank you for nurturing and caring for us with your ever-presence. Unisa management officials in attendance today, Unisa staff members and honorable stakeholders, representatives of the different organizations, collaborators and stakeholders, this event would not have lived to its lively expectation without your attendance, without your eyes, and without your ears. Thank you, Professor Makanya, for initiating and taking care of our flagship and prestigious lecture, which consistently brings into our fold men and women of honor that include Advocate S.P. Holomisa, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, not to mention our Honorable Minister, Dr. Bladen Nzimande, as I have indicated, a public intellectual, a political leader, and a champion of education and higher education. Professor Makanya, thanks for making us aware that we cannot wish away human intelligence, that we cannot wish away artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, and that we need to understand these as human ingenuities, intuitiveness, originality, and innovativeness. Our Honorable Minister of Higher Education, Science and Technology, thank you for your constructive, informative, and well-researched lecture. The role of transformative higher education in a developmental state is a response to challenges and opportunities posed by the fourth industrial revolution. Thanks for alerting us that in the face of artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, these should not rid us of who we are, but that these should rather empower us with the relevant skills necessary to address the unknown future. Thanks, Honorable Minister, for highlighting the possible influence and impact of new technologies and robotics, and for taking us on a historical and technological journey to this present state. Some of us were already oblivious to these historical facts. We are the BBTs, mind you, the born before technology. Thanks for challenging us, Honorable Minister, as we do research and engage theories of change, challenging us as to how objective we are. How do we engage our research with participants? How do we deal with the realities of our research endeavors? How will we ensure sustainability amidst the fears of loss of livelihood? Thank you, Honorable Minister, for reminding us that all industrial revolutions have equally affected different societies, particularly in terms of the provisioning of labor as they face inequalities. We are very much thankful, Honorable Minister, and you have alerted us that our universities have closer to 1.1 million students today, and these are actually providing some implications for governance and management within the higher education sector. Now, what we need to engage with whether these technologies will create another elitist education. These are the challenges that we have to face. And how do we skill and reskill our students and lecturers? And as one learned person once said, we needed to learn to unlearn and relearn. And you have challenged us, and truly challenged us. Can't we find interlinkages between the different disciplines that we offer here at Unisa? Thanks to you all, colleagues in attendance today, in attendance this evening, for your silence, for listening and engagement and concentration. You have been a wonderful audience, beautiful as you are in your diverse regalia. Dear colleagues, Honorable Minister, Professor Makanya, and our program director, the old lady Winnie Madikizela Mandela feels proud today, feels proud and honored to have hosted you. And we need to clap hands. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Professor Makanya, Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, as you are ascend the stage and maybe promise me some cold drink. Thank you.
I will request that we remain and our speakers will leave soon. How things are going to turn out, we are told that there will be food upstairs on the 3rd floor. And I'm told there are those people who have certain type of tags, they will identify them. They'll go to the inside core, but most of us will be there. The menu, I can assure you, you can take my word to the bank, it won't bounce. It's the same menu. And as we prepare to go, the quickest way, Minister, to incentivize even the deep rural person to befriend technology, when you say, I've sent an e-wallet, they find a way to get there. So as we ascend there, I'm reminded of the old Irish blessing, may the road rise up to meet you, may the wind be always at your back, may the sun shine warm upon your face, and may the rain fall soft upon your fields until we meet again. Thank you. Thank you. Cold.